The best creativity comes from the subconscious mind, not the conscious mind. It's true that not everyone in your life is going to be supportive when you change, especially because maybe they feel threatened by it because it challenges who they are in a way.
James McCrae, from advertising exec to meme master with nearly 500,000 followers.
If you feel stuck, that's part of the process. And there's a breakthrough that's going to happen when you feel stuck, because that's why you feel stuck. You can't be a good artist until you're first a bad artist. And you can't find your way in life until you've tried out all the ways that are not yours.
Is there any other advice that you might give to young entrepreneurs?
The human spirit is not meant to be put inside of a box. And there's so many external perceptions and expectations that get thrust upon us at different parts in our life. Honestly, one of the best things that I've done in my life is
Welcome to the show, James. I'm so excited that you're here. We're in Austin. We're in person. It's so nice to connect. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Thanks for having me on the show. It's good to meet you, and I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yeah. So I want to start by unpacking the name of the account that kind of is going to make you the most known for people, my listeners of the show, at least. I'm sure a lot of them follow you. Words Are Vibrations. This is your kind of like famous meme account. A lot of people know it. It's got over 450,000 followers, so it's not a small account by any means. And we'll talk about kind of the journey of, growing that and everything. But I first wanted to kind of unpack the meaning of that title of Words Are Vibrations. Words just in the sense of like language and our inner dialogue and how that influences our view of the world. And then also the idea of vibrations being like frequency and how we attract things into our lives. Can you kind of share your personal outlook on why words are vibrations and what that means to you?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I feel like my best ideas just pop into my head, sort of like spontaneously. So I remember when I changed my Instagram name to Words Are Vibrations, it just popped into my head. I didn't have any plan. I knew I wanted to change my Instagram name. The original name was the name of my first book, which was Shit Your Ego Says. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I was sort of outgrowing that name. And I noticed how the name had both the word shit and the word ego in the title. So it was sort of like, it was kind of a joke, but it was also sort of like, do I want these words to be associated with me? Is this representing what I want to express in the world? So it felt limiting. It felt sort of like not the right vibe. And I just, I didn't know what I wanted to change my name to. And I just sort of sat with it and didn't change it for weeks. And then out of nowhere, just Words Are Vibrations just popped into my head. And I just changed it like spontaneously on the spot. I didn't have a huge following at that time. But I'm a big believer in just sort of reinventing yourself and just changing your name if that feels relevant. And since I changed it, I've come to see a lot of meaning in that name. And, the idea that words are vibrations, and I've been a writer my whole life. I do a lot of things, but writing is sort of my core practice, my core modality. And, everything that we say and do and create, sends a vibration into the world. It's sort of like the ripple effect of our energy, and words have energy and words have vibration. And, for me, it's just about being a example of the change you want to see in the world. Mm-hmm. I try not to be too, complain about things, but rather, one of the memes that I created that has sort of like represents that name is be the glitch you want to see in the Matrix. Mm-hmm. So it's just sort of about like being very conscious and intentional with who we are, with our creativity, with our language, with our communication, with our art, with our social media. And, it's sort of like being a magician, because our words cast spells.
Yeah.
And like the word abracadabra literally means I create as I speak. So it's sort of like a reminder that everything that we do is casting a spell into the universe, and to be intentional about the spells we cast, whether that's in a relationship, on social media, in our art, in our business, and being the change that we want to see in the world.
So good. I love that. I know. I loved when I learned that about the word abracadabra. I was like, damn, as I speak, so I create.
Yeah.
It's so true. And then
Yeah.
you realize, I think that was one of the, biggest things in my own personal development journey that just like changed my whole life. But it seems so small and almost insignificant. But when you make the change of really understanding that your internal world creates the external world that you see and you experience, you really do change your entire experience of reality.
Yeah.
And that was what changed my life so much, was just by learning how to become the third party observer of what I was thinking, of what I was feeling, of what I was voicing aloud, and exactly things that I was consuming too. And just being more conscious of that, and how that really just started to change through, the reticular activating system and all of that, like what you pick up on and what you notice. Like I don't really even notice a lot of like the negativity or like, fear as much anymore. Of course we have that natural bias, but it's something that I wish everyone in the world could really like grasp and like learn and understand, because I think not only would it change their lives and allow them to wake up every day happier and more positive and more fulfilled, but just like the ripple effect that has on everyone in their lives. And I think that the world really would be a better place if everyone was embracing that understanding that we are the creators of our reality. And in that aspect, it's so powerful.
Totally. Yeah, there's a certain mindfulness aspect to it too, because I feel like it's so easy for people to get caught up in this sort of reactivity. And there's so much mental clutter in the world, and there's so much, so much, all the toxicity of the news and of the political discourse and of just how we relate to each other, in relationships, in politics. There's this certain level of sort of bickering that comes from this place of mental clutter. And the more I've practiced mindfulness and studied meditation and cultivated my own consciousness and my own inner world, you can start to separate, this kind of chatter from the ego and this reactivity that comes from all of the chaos around us. But you can actually, pull from a deeper source of stillness to be more intentional about how we show up in the world, rather than just reacting to what's happening around us. And I think as an artist, this is a core part of creativity, is sort of creating from the inside out and initiating your own reality, rather than always reacting to everything that's happening around us.
You mentioned earlier that you kind of spontaneously get your best ideas. And I think at least that's true for me. I think most people would probably agree that the more that you try to force creativity or like a good idea, it's almost like the more blocked you become. So I think with content especially, it's like if you block out a time in your calendar where it's like, okay, go be creative and come up with your best ideas, it can be very hard to feel like there's anything there. So I'm curious, because you have this quote that you've said, a mind too full of information has no room for inspiration. And I love that, because it relates to exactly what we're talking about, how like the spontaneity, or just like the openness, the nothingness is what I often talk about with creativity. Like, I think the definition to create is like to, bring something into being like out of nothing.
Right.
And so the ingredient that I think is missing for so many of us so often is the nothingness, is like the spaciousness that allows us to actually have access to source or divine wisdom or downloads, or just even like our higher self, or even just your own thoughts. Like, we're plugging our ears so often all the time in this like age of overconsumption, of always listening to everyone else's ideas and everyone else's creativity, that then you feel like you don't have that. But I think that we can source that in the right conditions. So in your experience, because you're quite an expert in, I think I admire writers so much, because there was another quote I heard recently that was like, writers hate to write. I'm like, I relate. Because it's like it's such a hard thing to do. Like, why is it so hard? But it is. There's like a discipline to giving yourself the spaciousness. So can you just speak to that a little bit of like where ideas come from and this idea of like accessing creativity?
Absolutely. Well, I believe strongly that the best creativity comes from the subconscious mind, not the conscious mind. And, I talk a lot about the yin and the yang of creativity. And, the tapping into the yin is sort of like the feminine aspect of the universe. This is like about receptivity, not force. It's more about being rather than action or doing. And I think that when we live in a society that's very much yang oriented, meaning it's more based on productivity and doing and like always being busy. But I think especially as an artist, if you're not rooted in that yin space, which is going to be about receptivity and stillness and again, cultivating your inner world, it's sort of like cultivating the soil before you can grow a garden. You need to water the soil. You need to plant the seeds, or it's almost like the womb. There's this sort of dark and mysterious place where new life grows. And I think that, in order to be creative and be productive and to be busy, you need to be grounded in more purpose. And that purpose comes from the subconscious. I feel like all artists are channels. And I think that creativity is a spirit that moves through us rather than something that we sort of strategize with our logical mind. There's certainly a place for strategy. There's certainly a place for thinking. Like when you're editing, you're writing, that's more a place for the critical mind to step in and, be more judgmental and to kind of analyze what you did. But when it comes to that initial, flow of creative expression, for me, it's less about thinking and honestly more about listening to see what is trying to come through me. So it's like, I like the analogy of the muse in ancient Greece, where the ancient Greeks, they would have different gods or goddesses to personify different things. And the muse was sort of this goddess spirit that would come down and whisper ideas into those who were open to receiving them. And, the muse is not literally real, but it is figuratively real. And I think that it's a metaphor for our own intuition. So for me, when I'm writing, my writing process is I'm trying not to think. I'm trying to feel, and I'm trying to sense what the muse is trying to say to me. And that muse could be, you could say that's your own higher self. You could say that's God. You could say that's, some people think they're channeling other entities or whatever it might be. But I think it's just connecting with your own intuition. And when you listen to that intuition, my writing process is very much me sitting there with an open notebook and just sitting there in silence quietly. And I'm not writing, but I'm waiting for the words to form in my mind before I write them down. So I'm sort of trying to make myself like
most people.
A conduit. It's chill though, because you got music playing, you've got your tea or coffee, and you're just sort of in that zone. You're not forcing it, And I think I never measure my productivity by my word count. It's not like the more you write, the better. I rather write 2 sentences that are pristine and like perfect than 6 paragraphs that I just kind of like, forced out. So just going into that place of receptivity and flow and connecting with your own intuition, which, I think the thinking mind can get in the way of that. So I think that there's a place for, the yin, for being receptive, for channeling, for intuition. And then once you get it out, then you can edit it, you can fix it, you can use your more strategic mind to like do something with it. But I think being open to what is trying to move through you and connecting with your emotions to really see what's trying to purge out of you, that's where my best ideas come from. And sometimes that could happen even when I'm not even expecting it.
Right.
It's sometimes if you just go for a walk in nature or you just create space in your life, create space in your day where you're not really trying to do anything, but you're in sort of just an open-minded place, then it's like my name, Words Are Vibrations. That just popped into my head one day. I wasn't even trying to think of it. So the best ideas can happen when you least expect it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that because we have that addiction to productivity and doing and busyness, as you said, it can be challenging to practice that like nothingness and to leave space for and to see the value in it before the ideas come through. Because I think there's a lot of people that might try that and then be like, well, I just wasted an hour of my day because nothing happened, right? But it is kind of like that practice of clearing your channel in a way. I guess you mentioned that, you believe that artists are channels. Is there anything that you do or have done to clear your channel in a sense? Like you mentioned setting the space and kind of the mood and having the music and tea and whatever, but maybe even just on a daily basis or outside of those like specific like writing type sessions, are there things that you do so that you can be a clearer channel and get those ideas like the Words Are Vibrations randomly when you're on a walk or in the shower?
Yeah. I think it really is about, I had to make lifestyle changes. I used to work in the advertising industry in New York City, which was a very fast-paced, demanding, productive job. I'm working 50 hours a week, and you go straight you start drinking in the office, and then you leave the office and go out drinking with your coworkers, and then you're drinking coffee all day, and you are sort of in this rat race of productivity. And in doing that, I really did lose connection with my own imagination, intuition, and like that inner artist, and I became very stuck and frustrated. And I really did have to make some pretty significant lifestyle changes to go from that career, from that version of myself, to really accepting and embracing myself as an artist and going deeper into that practice. So a big game changer for me was when I discovered Kundalini yoga back in New York City. I had never done yoga before. I'd never really meditated.
Straight for Kundalini.
It just, I found this studio. I didn't know what it was. And I just went there one day and I had no idea. And I felt like it was the right thing for me to do. So instead of buying one class, I bought like a 10-class pack just to kind of make myself come back, because I knew I might not come back otherwise. But something told me to do that. And whenever I left class, I would be full of inspiration and just have an open channel, because that particular practice, you're doing yoga, you're doing exercises, you're moving your body, but it's also a strong focus on meditation and on breathing. And it's sort of just kind of opens you up, and the thinking mind goes away, and you just sort of become, a channel in a way. So that studying Kundalini really is what helped me develop a meditation practice. And that's something that I continue today. I meditate every day, and it doesn't have to be a lot. When you're learning meditation, when you're like trying to integrate this into your life, I think it's helpful to be serious about it and maybe try to meditate for an hour once in a while, just to really go deep, right? I don't do that much anymore. I really just meditate for 10 minutes in the morning, but it's more for me about consistency rather than how long you're doing it. So that's been a big asset for my creativity. And then, I just changed my lifestyle, even things like diet and just your habits. I stopped going out to bars as much, and, eating junk food, and, consuming as much media and watching as much news and watching as much sort of like trash TV or whatever, because really the mind is like a garden, and what you plant is going to determine what grows. So I remember I would spend a lot more time in Central Park, just sort of in nature, going on long walks, reading poetry, because coming up, I was a poet. Like that was my first like creative, practice. And I would read poetry and I would write poetry all through my teenage years. And when I started working in advertising, I completely lost touch with my inner poet. Wasn't reading poetry, wasn't writing poetry. So I had to sort of make a concerted effort to get back into that. So I was just spending time in nature, reading poetry, meditating, and really changing the seeds that I was planting in my own consciousness. Going to more art galleries, things like that. Sort of being a sponge for inspiration, because we can be sponges for,
Drama.
for drama, for chaos, for all sorts of things that are affecting our consciousness in a negative way. But if we become sponges for inspiration, listening to music, consuming art, reading poetry, spending time in nature, you're really just setting the conditions for creativity to naturally happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it like, the people in your life at that time? Did they feel like were they witnessing a very stark kind of contrast with who you were and who you were becoming? Or did you have people around you that were just like happy for you and loved it? Or what was that like? Because a lot of people, when they go through those kind of seasons, okay, so now you're like deep in Kundalini yoga and you're meditating and you're like hanging out in the park and writing poetry. And maybe some of the people at your job didn't know that you were a poet in the past, or that there even was that side of you. I think that's a big thing that keeps people small, is, the outside projections and opinions of what people think, oh, or like how you're changing. So I'm just curious, from in your experience, what that was like being in New York City too, which is not, New Yorkers aren't really like that.
True. Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like I've gone through several sort of personal reinventions in my life, and it's true that not everyone in your life is going to be supportive when you change, especially because it maybe they feel threatened by it because it challenges who they are in a way, and they have a hard time accepting it. So I've definitely had that experience. I think that I've never really had to intentionally cut people out of my life, but I feel like when you change your life, when you change your vibration, your energy,
you're a match for different people naturally.
You're a match for different people naturally. So some people are going to fall out of your life, and I think that is totally normal. And I think that new people will come into your life, and the people that will come into your life are going to be more aligned and, supportive of who you are, who you're becoming. So I just think it's important for everyone to, not get too locked into their own self-perception. And our self-perception is often reinforced by the people around us who expect us to be a certain way and behave a certain way. And I just think it's more important to follow where you're led. And for me, I always, found new friends, and it's important. That's why it's important to if you are going through a change, to go be proactive with how you're changing. So I met a lot of friends in Kundalini yoga, or I met friends in different spiritual communities that, and before I knew it, my whole life looked different and my friends looked different. And some friends, grow with you, and some friends are supportive and they're open-minded, and those are your real friends. They love you for who you are, and not whatever, they don't,
what plans you're doing on the weekend.
Yeah, exactly. So it's definitely real, but it's, when you cross that bridge onto the other side, and it's always worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like my experience is quite similar. I've never really had to intentionally set boundaries with people, or be like, oh, got to cut this person out because they were really not supportive of who I was becoming. But there is that natural, I just think it's a consequence of authenticity and of growth that people don't talk about a lot, but that it stunts some people because they fear that, people in their lives are going to leave or not be aligned. But it's just that kind of natural fall away that, friendships or things fade when you don't relate on as much stuff anymore, or you don't have as much in common. And then the new people that have always come into my life through all of my different like evolutions of self have always felt like such a blessing, just like almost like I don't feel like it's becoming a new shiny version of yourself, but for me it almost feels more like a returning to like who you've always meant to be. I almost feel like the younger versions of self were more like the conditioned self.
Yes.
And like now the evolved version is not this like, oh, new shiny version that we're unboxing that never existed. It's almost like that's the origin. Like that's the original you.
Yes.
So more like an unbecoming rather than like a, unwrapping something brand new. And all the people that I've attracted in my life through that unbecoming process and like returning to the origin of like who my soul was always designed to be before I was, manipulated or, subjected to the conditioning of life and being a teenager and wanting to fit in. Those people have always been like such blessings in my life. And yeah, it only gets better. So I think that would be my sentiment to add on to yours, to like anyone who's feeling stuck by being in a personal evolution like that, is that it just continues to get better.
100%. We are not meant, the human spirit is not meant to be put inside of a box. And there's so many external perceptions and expectations that get kind of thrust upon us at different parts in our life, whether it's through coworkers, friends, or family. And it's really limiting. And honestly, one of the best things that I've done in my life is moved from different cities.
Yeah.
It's to really give yourself a chance to start over and to just show up, based on who you are today, not who other people expect you to be based on who you were in the past.
That's such a good point, because environment like influences so much of how we show up and who we are. And I don't know if you know this about my story, but like when I was 21, I met my fiance when I was studying abroad in Spain. And I decided, like crazily enough, that I was going to move to Spain after that and not go into corporate America or get jobs. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm just packing my bags. I'm going to see what happens with this guy. So I moved to Spain and I ended up living there for 6 years. And that is where like I had all of my, personal, like spiritual awakening, like really evolution of self. And I think a lot of it was in part to your point of like being in a whole new environment where you feel like you can be anybody. Like you could be nobody knows me here.
Exactly.
I have no past perceptions. I have no, there's no one calling me saying, hey, let's go to this spot or do this thing that we always do. Like you're kind of forced to be a whole new you. You have to reinvent yourself, because who are you in this city? Who are you in this country? What kind of friends do you want to make? What kind of things do you want to do? So yeah, I think that's a huge, huge point. And I see that, with people that never leave their hometowns. Like, I think it's beautiful to return to your hometown and want to grow a family there or be close. But I do think there's so much value in getting out of those four walls.
Yeah.
Because you just like are forced to see yourself in like a whole new way.
Absolutely.
Where was the first place that you moved, like when you got out of Minnesota?
Well, I moved a lot in Minnesota. I came from a really small town. And, I was an artist and I was a poet, but I didn't really have any direction or mentors, because there weren't a lot of artists around me or creatives. So I didn't really know what path to take to really become an artist. So I went to college initially.
Did you have that intention though? Were you like, I'm going to be an artist?
I did. Right in high school. It started with poetry. And then in my later teens, I got really into painting. I've always been sort of balancing like the visual arts and then the language arts.
Well, that advertising makes sense.
Advertising makes sense, and so does social media content. Yeah. And even my books, I always illustrate my own books and do all the graphics in them and things. So I'm always doing both. So I knew I wanted to be an artist. I just didn't know how. Like, I just thought like, oh, you just make great art and then maybe
wait for someone to notice.
Someone will discover you, or like however that happens. I had no idea.
I feel like that's also kind of how we approach like social media and content nowadays, which is like, if I just like post really good stuff, then it'll just work.
Yeah. Which doesn't always happen. And for me, I went to college and I dropped out because I hated it. And then I just became like, I spent a year as a starving artist, and I was moving around the country, working odd jobs and just like working on my art at night. And I'm glad I gave myself that freedom to explore, because I think you just really need to like really go for it and really even fail at what you're trying to become good at. Like I think that you can't be a good artist until you're first a bad artist, and you can't find your way in life until you've tried out all the ways that are not yours. So I think that failure is a beautiful part of the journey, and I don't think that you can find success without first stumbling into failure. And even as an entrepreneur, most people will fail at business before they succeed. So I think it's important for everyone, even no matter where they are in their journey, to give themselves permission to fail and to try things and to experiment. Because without that freedom, you're not going to find, the voice and the direction and the style and the idea that is really uniquely yours.
Yeah.
So I was exploring my own creativity, but I also got super depressed and didn't have any direction, didn't have any mentors. So I finally went back to college but to an art school and studied graphic design, and that gave me a lot of direction with my creativity, and eventually got into the advertising industry, first as a graphic designer and then a brand strategist. Then I moved from Minneapolis to New York City, and worked for 10 years on Madison Avenue in brand strategy, creating names and messaging and ad campaigns and websites and apps and all these things for different clients, and very creative, but it was also sort of like, it wasn't my own creativity, it was working in a corporate sort of environment. But New York City was the first kind of like big place that I moved, and I've lived in LA, and now I live in Austin, and different lessons along the way, and sort of a personal reinvention along the way as well with each stop.
I'm sure. Do you think that because when did you start your, because you're like famous for being like a meme artist.
Yeah.
So how did that come to be? And do you think, I mean, I would imagine so, but I don't know when you started it to really like line up this timeline, that your experience with brand strategy and, the visual side plus the messaging side and knowing what works and what grabs attention, was that background really helpful in you succeeding on social media?
I would say so. I think that everything that we do informs like what we do next. In other words, like we all have different journeys. We all have different career backgrounds. We all learn different lessons in our lives. And I think when we truly step into our own power as a creative, as an entrepreneur, as a podcaster, whatever it is, I think that we're pulling from our, all of our lessons along the way, even if they're not directly related to what we're doing, we sort of internalize them and we find a way to alchemize them. And sort of, that's why our offerings become this sort of signature recipe that is uniquely ours, because we're pulling on our own lessons and life experiences. So I would say that, yes, it's probably helped me on social media, but really, to answer your first question, I was never great at social media. I just had a personal account. Like my account now, Words of Vibrations, that was just my personal account. You can go back years and just see pictures of me and my friends drinking or whatever.
I love that because I'm such a fan of that.
That was my personal account.
Like just transform your personal account. Who cares?
Exactly. It's more natural. It's more you.
Yeah.
So I never really had any plan to grow it per se. But in like 2015, 16, I got really lucky and I got a book deal with Hay House. And it was just like this serendipitous moment because I had no audience. I had no social media following.
They want you to do social?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was kind of a long story, but they sort of like gifted me a book deal. But they strongly encouraged me to grow my platform. And then I still didn't know how to do that. But the book eventually came out and I needed to promote it and market it. I guess I needed to, it happened backwards for me. Like most people grow their platform, they grow their audience.
You have to now.
They define their message, and then they work their way up to getting a book deal.
Yeah.
complete opposite for me. I got a book deal when I was working in advertising and I had no audience whatsoever. I just happened to write a book that they really liked. But then I had to figure out how to grow my brand, how to promote my book, how to grow an audience. I had no idea. And I remember the Hay House like marketing director was giving me some advice, and she was like, just
do memes.
No. Well, what she said was her exact words were, "Do whatever makes you jazzed." That's what she said. And so at that time, like when I was looking at other Hay House authors, it was like people like Gabrielle Bernstein, right? And she's a great like self-help speaker, and like she makes these videos, and she's like a spiritual cheerleader. So I thought I had to do like that, which just kind of wasn't my personality. So I didn't know what to do. But when Hay House told me to do what made me jazzed, I'm like, well, what makes me jazzed? Like, it's not talking to a camera.
Giggle.
I know.
To what makes you jazzed?
But it's like, but it's true. Like, what makes you really excited?
Yeah.
Like, what do you feel excited about? Like, if you were just left to your own devices, like, what would you have the most fun doing? Mm-hmm. And the first thing that came to my mind was drawing, because I was always, again, a visual artist. I just like to sketch and just doodle. Not that I'm a great drawer, but I love to doodle. And I always had done that. So my first sort of phase on social media was making these little drawings, and they were almost like little cartoons with little lessons in them. Mm-hmm. So they were almost like early memes, like they were almost like mimetic in a way, because it was like a little bit funny and a little bit like characters maybe talking, but with some spiritual message or something. And I'm not a great drawer. They were just kind of stick figures, but that's kind of how I started to kind of find my voice on social media. And I grew a little bit, but not a lot. And we moved from New York to LA, and this was right when the pandemic happened. And I think like a lot of people during the pandemic, I really started to just sort of analyze my own life and my voice and like what's working, what's not. You sort of take inventory of your life because you're sort of like on timeout. Mm-hmm. And the conclusion I came to is that I was trying to be this self-help author, because I was like a Hay House author, but it didn't feel natural. I felt like I was trying too hard to be an inspirational speaker, or like, you were
trying to fit the mold. But
I was trying to fit the mold. And the world was in such a weird place and like a chaotic place, and everything was just sort of absurd in a way. Like, especially in LA, we had...
I know, I was going to say, damn, you just moved to LA right for the pandemic. That's unfortunate.
No, it was the best thing, because we were in a 1-bedroom apartment in this old building in New York City that was just like in a very crowded place. And then we ended up in Topanga in a house with a yard and hiking trails in our backyard and the ocean. So it was actually couldn't have been a better place to land for that.
Yeah.
That was thanks to my wife's intuition, who told us to move there.
Give her all the credit. Totally.
But it was just such a weird time. There was a pandemic happening. There was LA was having all these like Black Lives Matter riots, and like all the stores and buildings were boarded up. The National Guard was lined up all along the streets with like tanks and machine guns, and
it was intense.
And there was all these conspiracy theories going around the internet, and it was just this very intense time. And it felt like for me it felt like being a self-help motivational person was not what I felt like the world needed. I felt that I needed personally to really return to being an artist. And I felt like that was the only way I could draw from a deeper place to share something that I felt might be even more useful, was to sort of break the mold and stop trying to be something that I thought I was supposed to be, but really go back to being an artist. And that's when I started writing poetry again. And that's when I started making memes. And for me, those two really were hand in hand, because it was like they were both ways to express myself creatively that were just sort of more experimental. And I felt with poetry and with memes, you could say things that you can't necessarily say otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
And like it's the language of metaphor, it's the language of myth. There's and with memes there's some humor built into it where it's almost like a joke. So I got tired of this idea of trying to be, like you could stand up and give a lecture and you could like say things that some people will agree with and some people won't, or you could write like an essay trying to make a point and like, form this linear logical argument about what you want to say. And some people will relate to it, some people won't. But I was more interested in poetry and memes to say things in a way that kind of bypasses the intellect and sort of hits you in the heart or hits you in the gut.
That's so true. I didn't really think about it that way, but it's like it's less of that. Like, I feel like it bypasses the binary of like, I agree with this, I don't agree with this. And it kind of just like creates this feeling of like, oh, haha, that's relatable.
100%. With a meme, it might be, haha, that's relatable. Or the
poetry might be like, that's beautiful.
Exactly.
Ooh,
it's like, what a beautiful thought. And you sort of bring people out of this like rigid mindset of like binaries and of this like intellect. And it's sort of like if you're at a dinner table and everyone's bickering, how do you raise the level of conversation above the level of bickering? And that could be through humor. That could be through something that's more inspiring. It's like, or you could just play a song, and suddenly the song sort of breaks through the noise, and it kind of gives people this beautiful space to share together. So that's when I started making memes and writing poetry, and honestly, that's when my account started to grow. Was when I stopped trying to fit the mold of a self-help author or a motivational speaker, and allow myself to honestly to talk shit or to make a joke or to say things that weren't politically correct, and just to really be more of myself. And memes gave me like sort of the freedom to do that.
So interesting. And I think, so many people are probably frustrated by the idea that like it started working as soon as I stopped trying. It's like what you hear so often, but it's so frustrating that that's, the advice. But it is kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the creativity. Like,
yeah,
when you're in the openness of not trying to force an idea, it's usually when something comes through.
But I will say this, though. I definitely did try, because when I found my lane, when I found my voice in memes, I started creating content more than ever before. Like I was in a zone where I was maybe posting once a week, and I had to kind of like
get myself to do it. I had to like I had to write out a caption, and like it was more of a laborious process. But when I found my voice with memes, I found a flow, and it was just coming out of me, and I started doing it all the time because it was more fun. So I would make memes in the morning, I would make memes at night, and sometimes I would make 5 a day. And suddenly I had this backlog of content that I had to post. So I started posting every day, and then probably for a year I was posting twice a day, just because I was making so much stuff. So yes, in a way I wasn't trying to be someone who I wasn't. But at the same time, I was like exploring, working, writing, and sort of creating more than ever before, because it was coming through more naturally. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, to your point earlier, you kind of have to fail and go through those cycles of, again, trying to fit the mold or thinking, okay, this is who I'm supposed to be, and like doing it that way, to then only realize through the doing what is actually authentic to you. And then when you find that kind of zone, the ideas just start pouring in, and it kind of flows from there. But I think people get discouraged too early in the process of not feeling like it's easy for them. But that's another thing, even, outside of social media, but I'm sure with writing and business and, everything else that you've done as an entrepreneur, I think there's this theme, especially at least in like the spiritual space, that like it is supposed to be easy. But I think it can become easy when you find that zone, like you mentioned. But there is so often the seasons where it's not easy. Like you said, it's more laborious and you are trying and you are failing. And that's a very real side of it too, that I don't think we just get to start and skip all of that and go right to the magic.
Yeah. No, I mean, life is full of seasons, and some are easier than others. I think that the creative process, and when I say the creative process, that could mean writing a book, it could be making social media content, it could mean starting a business. The creative process is a journey into the unknown. There's no way of knowing in advance exactly how it's going to turn out. Think about if someone sits down to write the first words of a book. There's no way that they are going to know in advance the exact sequence of words that's going to lead to the best book and exactly how it's going to end. It's a process of exploration and discovery. And sometimes that comes easier than others. There are parts of writing a book that come super easy, and then there are parts where you feel like you're completely lost and you're like, none of this is working. I've got to rethink the whole thing. And it's usually not as bad as you think in that moment, but I've definitely felt that way many times. And it's about continuing to explore and put one foot in front of the other and just being where you are in the process. Like if you feel stuck, that's part of the process. And there's a breakthrough that's going to happen when you feel stuck, because that's why you feel stuck, because you're on the precipice of a breakthrough. So sticking with it and not abandoning ship when things don't go easy, and to also reinvent yourself if it's no longer working. I was making memes and posting memes once a day, twice a day for years. And there was a time where my audience was growing like 1,000 people a day for like months, it seemed. But that changes too. The algorithm changes. At a certain point, memes became way more ubiquitous on social media, and like suddenly everyone's making memes. Yeah. And my voice wasn't as unique as it used to be. So I had to rethink my whole strategy. And again, we said this earlier, but it's like not getting stuck with who you are based on who you were in the past or who other people expect you to be, but continuing to reinvent yourself whenever you feel stuck. So for me, like that meant like maybe making less memes, and for me, it was like, okay, can I make a meme without an image? Meaning, can the words be so clear and be so, carry the message on their own without the need of an image? And that sort of became like a new challenge. So like just words on a slide, but words that carried that same almost energy that a meme would. So that was sort of became a new challenge for me. So it was kind of back to writing, but writing in a style of memes almost, if that makes sense. So just because something worked in the past doesn't mean it's going to work in the future. So you've always got to sort of, that's why I like this, there's this concept in Zen Buddhism called beginner's mind. And I think this is one of my favorite things is to always show up every day, no matter what you're doing, as a beginner. Because they say that in an expert's mind, there are few solutions, because you think you know the answer. You're like, I'm an expert, and my years of expertise, I know that this is the right thing to do. But if you're a beginner, you're open to all possible solutions because you don't really know the answer. And I think that's a great approach to have in life, in art, in business, is having a beginner's mind and staying open-minded and not continuing to do things the way you always did them, but to show up how you feel that day. And that might mean trying things that are completely new and continuing to allow yourself to make mistakes as you find the new way forward.
Mm. I want to circle back to the idea of humor that is kind of layered in that and like a huge part of the journey of you creating memes and, bypassing that part of our mind that wants to be so critical, and just kind of talk about the importance of infusing humor into this whole, personal development journey. You kind of mentioned feeling like the personal development guru or like the self-help speaker, like wasn't really
Yeah.
you, but in a lot of ways your work still really helps people grow and kind of like examine new parts of themselves. But by infusing it with humor, I think it allows us to stay really grounded in like topics that can sometimes feel really like heavy. Or I kind of refer to this idea as like the healing trap, which is where once you get really into this type of work, you feel really addicted to the idea that there's always something about you to be fixed. And so you're always kind of looking for the next limiting belief or like the next, like where am I stopping myself? Or, how can I break through to the next level? Because there must be something else that I should or could be doing. And I think humor allows us to like anchor back into just like the present of like, this is all just like a funny trip that we're on anyways.
Yeah. Well, that's why my second book is called How to Laugh in Ironic Amusement During Your Existential Crisis.
I know, I love that title.
And that's actually a book of poetry and memes that, I noticed that just especially in spirituality in particular, things can become so serious.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like that when we take things so seriously, we could make things harder than they need to be. And I think that sometimes the most honest thing to do is exactly that, to laugh in ironic amusement during your existential crisis. And that's sort of for me, like a breakthrough moment where you realize like, oh, okay, the reality is like, we don't really know what's going on. And I think we become too serious when we try to be so certain about what we know and what we think and what we need to do. And we put all of this pressure on ourselves to perform at a certain level or to, or to be healed or to be enlightened. And it becomes like this struggle. And I just think that is helpful sometimes. Like I humor can definitely be a form of bypassing if you refuse to see things ever seriously, or refuse to see the darkness or to feel the darkness or to feel pain. I think it's important to feel your feelings, to embrace your own darkness, to admit when you feel sad or confused or lonely or upset, and the full range of the human experience. But humor is part of that human experience as well. And for me, laughter is liberating. And it's with memes, it's a good way to challenge people's preconceptions and to express different ideas. And at times I've gotten some comments on my page, like maybe if I shared a meme that was especially sarcastic, for example, and I always get comments that are being like, oh, what kind of vibrations are these words? like calling me out for my name and the fact that I'm maybe being like sarcastic or something.
Or like they've categorized you in their own mind.
They've
That's
categorized
like you should be like this spiritual.
Exactly. But I would respond back and be like, well, laughter is the highest vibration. Right. So, so I just don't believe in taking life too seriously. I mean, of course we take our, certain parts of life. You take your friendship seriously and your family, and you take love seriously. And it is serious in so many ways, but at the same time, it's sort of a cosmic joke at the same time, just existence itself. And I think for me, it's been so honestly healing to get out of your own ego mind and to be able to laugh at the cosmic joke. And I think that's an aspect of spirituality too.
Humor is such a high frequency. It is such a high vibration, like being able to laugh at things. And I think in a lot of ways, like the world has gone in a direction where we're so obsessed with like being politically correct or like caveating everything and we're probably even doing that in this episode right now. Like, well, of course it's kind of serious, but it's like, like we can barely ever say what we actually want to say because of course everything has nuance. You know, of course there's multiple sides to every single coin. But I think with comedians, even especially, like they are in such an interesting climate. They're artists in their own way. And like the world that we live in doesn't really lend to them being able to be as provocative or sarcastic or like putting themselves out on a limb as they might have been able to, you know, a decade or two ago. But there is such value also in creating things that are polar in some way. Like I always teach that to my clients of this idea of you have to polarize to magnetize. Like a magnet is only magnetic because it has those polar opposite ends. And so if you want your content, your presence, your brand, anything to be truly magnetic, you have to be willing to have those polar ends. And so that means there's going to be people that really reject you or dislike you or disagree with you. And then there's going to be people that are like, this is my person. Like I'm obsessed. I love your content. So I'm curious about your relationship with, you know, you've mentioned some of those comments, which aren't really fully hate comments. They're just, you know, someone being a Karen on the internet. But if you have received that type of energy when you are a little bit more polar of, you know, people being haters.
Yeah. Oh, I've definitely had my share. There, you know, I'm pretty, I think I'm more tame now than I used to be. I used to more sort of intentionally push buttons in a way, or, I used to say, you know, just be a little more triggering, whether that's like making fun of the spiritual community or making fun of different political ideologies. You know, I sort of make fun of things that I feel are too rigid. And I think that that's why humor is so important. Humor is almost, it's funny because you're almost saying something that you're not supposed to say.
Yeah.
And that's why it's funny.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, that's why you laugh. It's sort of like liberating to hear someone say something that you sort of agree with, but
or you've probably thought but would never say.
Exactly. You've thought it maybe, but but they actually say it, and it's sort of liberating to hear. So it's sort of like humor is sort of like a pressure valve, or if there's too much pressure in something, humor is just a way to kind of like let out some of that pressure. And it's like, and it feels good to let it out because otherwise you're too pent up. So for me, my like philosophy in being funny online or on social media or with memes, I would never make fun of people or it's like I would always make fun of what I felt were rigid ideologies. You know what I mean? So I would never want to insult anybody, but I would more challenge them with their
it's like using humor to expose the hypocrisy of something or the rigidity of something, or more like concepts rather than individuals.
There was a yoga teacher that I had that talked about this idea of you need to poke and provoke in order to elevate, something like that. So it's like to get someone, if someone's going to elevate, the first thing you need to do is get them out of their sort of patterns. So humor is a way to sort of like poke and provoke and almost lightly trigger with love, that gets people out of their maybe rigid ideology or mindset. Let them see sort of the humor in that way of thinking, and then they can sort of liberate themselves from carrying that sort of rigid ideology.
Well, it's almost like, you know, people say like your triggers are your biggest teachers.
Yeah.
Like if something that's meant to be funny really triggers you, it also maybe is the eye-opening moment of like, why am I so offended by this thing that everyone else is laughing at or that everyone else thinks is hilarious? And then it kind of breaks the bubble, to your point, of like opening up the perspective to maybe see something outside of that.
Yeah. And humor, you know, I guess humor can be mean-spirited in a way too, but my philosophy was always to make fun of ideologies, not people, but also to make fun of ideologies equally. where whether that's the right or the left or someone who's too spiritual or too much of an atheist, like whatever extreme, I'd always make fun of the extremes, so I was kind of sort of like a very inclusive in my triggering. And also you sort of make fun of yourself too, because like at the same time I'm part of the spiritual community.
Yeah.
And I do go to yoga, and I do, I have drank ayahuasca, and I have, done these things. So I'm also making fun of myself. So that kind of makes it less mean-spirited, because I'm also ultimately just making fun of myself.
Yeah. No, I love that. I've done like little skits before of things like personal development stuff or spirituality things, or even like coaching industry specific stuff. Like, and I love it because like I'm included in it, and it's something that we all like accept, but it's almost pointing out the things that we've all like just created this ecosystem where it's like, this is normalized. But when you can like zoom out and be like, this is kind of fucking weird that we're all doing this.
Yes.
And then it's funny.
I like that. You're kind of zooming out of the narrow and just seeing the big picture for 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So to close, is there any other advice that you might give to young entrepreneurs or people wanting to build their brands utilizing social media? We're artists now in this age of algorithms. You have a quote, "Born to be an artist, forced to make content," which I think is hilarious. But we've talked about a lot of it so far, already of getting into the flow and being in that state where you are not forcing or pushing, the authenticity piece, failing forward. Is there anything else that you might say to someone who's in the come up stages of their career in that sense?
Yeah. So many things. I think that for like I've said in this conversation, I had so many I tried so many different styles and voices on social media before I really found my voice. So that's the first thing. If you're just starting out, like, give yourself permission to experiment, to explore, both in voice and style, right? Those are the two things to master on social media, are voice and style. And your voice is really what you have to say. And really, dig deep with that, because a lot of people say a lot of things, and a lot of people maybe have a similar message or the same message, which is fine. There's a lot of companies that sell similar products, so you don't have to be the only one that offers a certain idea or message or service. But I would question what makes your approach different. How do you see the world differently than others? How can you say things that people want to stop and listen to? Mm-hmm. And that's got to be different, especially social media. You got to think how people are using it. They're just how quickly we scroll. And the reality is you only have a couple seconds to get someone's attention. So you've got to say things that are different and that matter to people. And it's not going to matter to other people unless it matters to you. So I feel like I'm always finding my voice on social media. I feel like I've been stuck lately. And the other night I was feeling super tired, and I wasn't even planning to make content. I was just I just started to write out all the reasons I was tired and like what I was tired of. And it was just like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of that. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of that. And I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to post this on social media. And then like that got way more engagement than other things recently. Yeah. So, being honest and saying what matters to you in this moment. Don't feel like you have to say what other people are saying. Don't feel like you have to speak on every single, thing that comes along, in the media, in the news, in whatever, but really what matters to you in the moment, and try to be as honest as possible. And if it doesn't matter to you, it's not going to matter to others. Mm-hmm. So really get in touch with yourself and your message and what you want to share with the world, and get really clear on that. And try a lot of different things. Don't worry about the metrics on every single post, because if I had done that, then I wouldn't have got where I am today. You have to you never know what's going to click. So you've got to try a lot of different things, and don't worry about the metrics, but worry about, I always say focus on your message, not your metrics. And your metrics will grow in proportion to the clarity of your message, right? And then style is another thing. And that's just like, what's your style online? Like, do you make memes? Do you make reels? Do you make carousel posts where you're teaching a lesson? Do you share short inspirational quotes? So like what style works best for you? Like, I'm not great with reels. I make some, I like to do them. I want to do more of them, but it's not my go-to because it doesn't come as naturally to me. But some people are great on camera or speaking. So find the style that works for you and then repeat that. And also try different things, like, mix up your style, try a meme, try a poem, try a more like a carousel teaching post. But I always say different people go viral for entirely different reasons.
Yeah, so true.
So it's not about copying someone else's format or formula. It's about finding the style that is uniquely yours, that is going to be easy for you to replicate. Like, if it's hard for you to do and it feels like a chore, you're just not going to do it.
You won't be.
You're going to resist it. It's not going to be fun. It's going to feel like work. That's why I don't make reels. For me, reels feel like work. I got to think of what I'm going to say. I got to set up my camera. I got to edit it. And I still do them because I see value in doing them. And for me,
You have a certain level of tolerance.
well, as a meme artist, I realized that like a lot of people didn't know who I was. They're like, oh, this is a meme page. So I intentionally will do photos and videos so people
More
do
recently,
know.
I feel, because it was largely faceless.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So I sort of had to get out of my comfort zone and insert myself in it more. So people did know that I was the person behind this. But find the style that's most fun for you, that you can do, that doesn't feel like work. And then that's just going to, if it's not fun, you're not going to do it. So find the style that's fun for you, whatever that is. Whatever makes you jazzed, as Hay House would say.
Yeah, we'll just close with that. The best advice. I don't know if you remember who that was from Hay House, but shout out.
Yeah.
Whatever makes you jazzed. That is the expert tip. Thank you so much for coming on, James. This was so much fun. Love this conversation. We're going to link all of your work and books and everything for everyone to check out. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Thanks for having me on. This was great chatting with you, and looking forward to doing it again.
Yes. All right.